Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Judisk kultur i Sverige and Konstakademin on this very special occasion of the open lecture with the laureate of the 2022 Gilel Storch Award, Adam Michnik. And this is a tradition. Every time we give the Gilel Storch Award, we try to have an open lecture that people will come and meet the laureate, listen to the laureate, and have a first-hand experience of why he or she gets this worthy award. Adam Michnik, I was told to say, dissident, political activist, publicist, journalist, receives the Gilel Storch Award for his work to promote democracy and oppose oppression, and because of his acts led to political actions and made facts on the ground ever since the late 60s. And when we look at the political developments, the recent developments, we realize that we need many more Michniks in our lives, in Europe and internationally. Today also marks the official day of the end of World War II. But what will happen in the future, we will see. It's just happened that we're holding this talk on this event. And tomorrow, Adam Michnik will receive the award. I just want to leave the stage saying that we are going to have with us from Lviv, Yaroslav Hrytsak, a professor and a historian. And he is, we invited him to Stockholm. He couldn't be with us today, this time not because of COVID, but because of the war. He did not want to leave his family in Lviv and travel to Sweden, but we hope to have him in Sweden under better circumstances. Welcome, Yaroslav. And I leave the stage to our eminent moderator, Per Svensson, senior journalist and author. And we will have with us Hannes Meidol, who will read a text by a poet from Ukraine. And our interpreter today is Stefan Ingvarsson. So I wish you all a meaningful afternoon, and then after that, please join us all for a glass of wine at the foyer and a more personal encounter with Mr. Michnik. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, and we will, this seminar or lecture we'll try to mix languages in the best way possible. So we'll mix, I will speak English, Professor Hrytsak will speak English, and Stefan will translate English into Polish, and Mr. Michnik will stick to Polish. So we'll see how that works, but if you think with a bit of goodwill...
And English was introduced today, so yeah. We'll manage.
With a little goodwill, I think it would work out fine. And since adding to the biography of Mr. Michnik, would also add that he's an historian, studied history at university as a young man and was thrown out because of his opposition to the regime at that time, but returned and finished his studies in history later on. And we will, Mr. Hrytsak is a professor in history at the Catholic University in Lviv, and we will focus rather heavily this afternoon on these two topics, Ukraine and Poland, and history, trying to connect them. And to make it easier, I think we will start with a couple of questions to Mr. Michnik, and then bring in Mr. Hrytsak, and then try to join them both. It's always a little bit complicated. We assume and one person is live, but we'll try. But first of all, I will put the question to both of you. You are old friends, Mr. Michnik and Professor Hrytsak.
Zaczniemy od pierwszego pytania. Jesteście dawnymi przyjaciółmi z panem profesorem Hrytsakiem.
Ale pytanie jakie
tak,
jest?
Więc
Tak,
jak wygląda wasza przyjaźń?
No więc znamy się od wielu lat. Profesor Hrytsak jest na Uniwersytecie w Lwowie, ale wielokrotnie publikował u nas w gazecie wyborczej. Ja spotkałem go w różnych miejscach, w Lwowie, w Kijowie, w Warszawie, w Nowym Jorku.
We know each other since many years, and Professor Hrytsak also publishes his texts in my newspaper, Gazeta Wyborcza, but we've met in Lviv, in Warsaw, in New York, and all over the place.
On napisał świetną historię najnowszą Ukrainy.
He's noted for his contemporary history of Ukraine, a book that is very well read.
Która moim zdaniem powinna, zwłaszcza w obecnej sytuacji, być przetłumaczona na wszystkie języki europejskie.
A book that, given the current circumstances, should be translated into all European languages.
Jarosław Hrytsak jest intelektualistą, wolnym od nacjonalizmu, od fanatyzmu, od nietolerancji.
Mr. Hrytsak is an intellectual free from nationalism, chauvinism and intolerance.
Dla mnie jest bardzo ważne, że zawsze, od kiedy go znam, był zwolennikiem zbliżenia i pojednania polsko-ukraińskiego, czyli ukraińsko-polskiego.
I mean, the important thing for me from the very moment we met is that he's so dedicated to the reconciliation between Poles and Ukrainians and Poles.
Więc warto go posłuchać, żebyście Państwo się zorientowali, jakich to Ukraińców Władimir Putin nazywa faszystami i banderowcami.
So it's very important to hear him speak, because then we understand which Ukrainians Putin calls banderists and Nazis.
I think we shall return to this, the relation between Poland and Ukraine, but I will start asking you, as Lisa said, today is the 8th of May, and tomorrow Putin will stage his so-called victory parade in Moscow, his military parade, and he has been very obsessed with history later years. How should one understand the use and abuse of history, Putin's use and abuse of history?
Ważnym tematem dla pana Putina, jak rozumieć jego używanie i wykorzystywanie historii w tym, co mówi i robi.
No, nie wiem, co Jarosław odpowie na to pytanie, ale ja powiem, że Putin jako myśliciel historyczny przypomina mi komediową postać z sztuki Gogola Rewizor.
I don't know what Mr. Hrytsak will say, but to me, the idea of Putin as a historian reminds me of Gogol's accountant. Sorry, I don't know Gogol in English.
Po prostu Putin używa historii, która po pierwsze jest zafałszowana, zakłamana, po drugie nie ma żadnego odniesienia do rzeczywistości, a po trzecie no to po prostu, ja mówię to jako historyk teraz, to po prostu jest coś niesłychanego. Jak gdybym powiedział jedną dziesiątą tych putinowskich bredni, to bym się nigdy nie dostał na studia na Uniwersytecie Warszawskim.
Well, Putin as a historian, I mean, first of all, the version of history that he declares, speaks, is a lie from the very beginning to the end. It has absolutely no connection to reality. And I'm saying this as a former student of history. I would have never been, admitted to my department of history, just using 1/10 of the lies that he has used in his speeches and writing.
Rosyjski historyk, zresztą konserwatywny i prawosławny, Andrzej Zubow, napisał, że Władimirowicz Putin w tym, co robi i jak to uzasadnia, przypomina Adolfa Aloisiewicza Hitlera. Ja się w tej sprawie z Zubowem zgadzam.
Den ryske historikern Alexander Zubow har i sina egna the Russian historian. Sorry, I really didn't know this would be in English until 15 minutes ago. The Russian historian Zubow, in his own writing,
Konserwatywny,
he compared, and he is both conservative and orthodox. He describes Putin's vision of history as similar to Adolf Hitler's.
Ja się z nim zgadzam.
And I agree with him. Dziękuję.
But you have met Putin several times. What was your impression of him then, and how has it changed today?
Ale wy się spotkaliście z Putinem przecież. Jakie wtedy zrobił na panu wrażenie?
Ja z nim się spotkałem więcej niż raz. No.
Yes, we've met many times, Putin and I.
Za pierwszym razem zrobił na mnie wrażenie dobre.
The first time I got a good impression of him.
To był jakiś 2001 rok.
Could have been around 2001.
On się wybierał jako nowy prezydent Rosji do Polski.
He came to Poland as a newly elected president of Russia.
No jako naczelny redaktor wielkiego dziennika pojechałem do Moskwy zrobić z nim interwiu i on się zgodził.
And as the editor-in-chief of a large Polish newspaper, I went to Moscow ahead of this visit to make an interview with him, and he agreed.
To była sytuacja trochę komiczna, dlatego że drugorzędny oficer KGB rozmawiał z pierwszorzędnym po polskim dysydentem.
It was a quite specific situation because a second-rate KGB officer talked to a first-rate Polish dissident.
I zrobił na mnie wrażenie dobre, dlatego że tam nie było tej, w tym co odpowiadam na moje pytania, nie było tej sowieckiej newspeak, nowomowy. No.
He made a good impression because he didn't use this kind of linga of the Soviet nomenclatura. It was a different language.
On poza tym mnie ujął, jak ja się spytałem, jaką on lubi literaturę, to powiedział, że lubi Mandelsztama. No jak ktoś mi mówi, że lubi Mandelsztama, to nie może być ostatni łajdak. No.
And when I asked him what kind of literature he liked, and he said that he likes to read Mandelstam, I felt that he cannot be like the worst kind of person. If someone likes Mandelstam, then...
No ale okazało się, że wszystko na świecie się zmienia i Putin też się zmienił.
But as we all know, everything changes in this world, and Putin also apparently changed.
On się coraz bardziej czuł jak kolejny rosyjski cara. Właściwie takie skrzyżowanie cara z pierwszym sekretarzem partii komunistycznej. No.
He increasingly started feeling and behaving like a czar, but not only as one of all the czars, but also this very intricate mixture of Tsar and first secretary of the Communist Party.
Więc jak z nim rozmawiałem po kilkunastu latach, to już było zupełnie inaczej.
And when I spoke to him again a few, more than 10 years later, it was a completely different.
To była tak zwana konferencja wałdańska. Mianowicie tam zapraszano rozmaitych ludzi z całego świata, którzy się interesowali Rosją i wykazywali swoją sympatię do Rosji. Mówiąc językiem Władimira Ilicza Lenina, to byli tak zwani pożyteczni idioci.
This was a different setting. It was a conference where a lot of people were invited from around the world who admired and liked Russia, using the wording of Lenin, useful idiots.
I ja zostałem potraktowany w ten sposób i dlatego byłem tam zaproszony.
And I was treated as such and invited there.
I ja rzeczywiście byłem zawsze przeciwnikiem takiej polskiej rusofobii i polskiego antyrosyjskiego nacjonalizmu. Ja bardzo szanowałem rosyjskich dysydentów i z wieloma z nich się zaprzyjaźniłem.
And it is true that I've always been, I've always had sympathy for Russia, and I've been against the kind of Polish Russophobia that you encounter among many Poles. And I've always admired the Soviet dissidents, and I befriended many of them.
I to było w Soczi, w takiej rezydencji Putina, zbudowanej wedle najlepszych wzorów bizantyjskich, to wszystko ociekało złotem, kryształami, marmurami i tak dalej.
And this was in Sochi, some kind of palace of the Putin administration. It was built in a Byzantine style, full of gold, marble, and luxury.
No i tam przywieźli nas i na początku na dole w takim wielkim holu nas częstowali. Wszystko było. Jesiotry, łososie, kawior, szynka, wódka, whisky. Wszystko było. I tak 1,5 godziny, żebyśmy skruszeli.
And when we arrived, they gave us everything. Caviar, fish, vodka, whiskey. There was plenty of everything. And during 1.5 hours, we kind of softened up with this treatment.
I potem nas zawadzili na górę, gdzie Putin nas już czekał. Taki długi stół, taki długi, żebyśmy wszyscy zmieścili się w tym stole i każdy mógł zadać jakieś pytanie Putinowi.
And then when we were ready, we were brought up to Mr. Putin on a higher floor. And there was a very long table that would fit all of us so that we could sit at one table. And Putin waited for us there, and we were allowed to ask one question each.
Poprzedniego dnia jeden z takich kremlowskich, można powiedzieć, baronów złapał mnie przywódcę i mówi: słuchaj Adam, czy ty byś nie spytał Władimira Władimirowicza, czy będą stawiane upamiętnienia, pomniki ofiar stalinowskiego terroru. Ja byłem już lekko w stanie wskazującym na spożycie alkoholu i powiedziałem: ta sama, co mogę spytać.
And the day before, I was speaking to one of the barons of Putin's Russia, and and we were drinking vodka, and he asked me, well, Adam, couldn't you ask him if there will be monuments erected to the victims of Stalin's repressions? And I, being under, obvious influence of alcohol, agreed and said I could ask.
A potem pomyślałem sobie, jeżeli ten facet, który jest jednym z doradców Putina, chce, żebym ja o to zapytał Putina, znaczy, że tego chce Putin. To znaczy, że on nie chce, żebym o co innego go spytał. A, to się, o co mam spytać go? I pomyślałem, wiem, dlaczego Chodorkowski w więzieniu siedzi.
And then I realized when I sobered up that if one of Putin's advisors wants me to ask this question, it actually means that this is the question that Mr. Putin wants me to ask. And I said, okay, I will have to come up with another question. And then in the end I asked why Khodorkovsky, the main opposition leader at the time, was in jail.
I powiedziałem tak, pana szef, powiedziałem do Putina, pana szef, powiedział, że w Rosji rządzi prawny nihilizm. A ten jego szef to był wtedy Miedwiediew, bo Putin był premierem, a Miedwiediew prezydentem był. Jak on usłyszał, że on ma szefa jakiegoś, to on już tak poczerwieniał, że jak pomidor.
And I started by saying that your boss, and that his boss at the time was Medvedev, because at the time Putin was prime minister, says that Russia is ruled by nihilism, but just saying the words "your boss" made him red.
I mówi tak, ten Chodorkowski ma ręce we krwi po łokcie. Ja mówię, przecież on nie za to jest, nie o to jest oskarżany. Mówi, nie ma znaczenia, o co jest oskarżany, ale ma ręce we krwi po łokcie, mordował ludzi. Ale jak się zgodzi na pewne warunki, to wyjdzie. No, teraz ja myślę, taka informacja nie może pozostać tylko między nami. No.
So when I asked the question about Khodorkovsky, he said, but he has his hands up to his elbows in blood. And I said, well, perhaps, but that's not what he's accused of and why he's in jail. And he says, oh, it doesn't matter why he's in jail. The important thing is that he has his hands up here in blood. But if he agrees on certain conditions, we'll release him. And then I felt that this information, his answer to my question, cannot remain something between the two of us.
I następnego dnia to opowiedziałem dziennikarzom z Nowej Gazety i chyba dałem wywiad dla Moskwy chyba. No. I stała się publiczna.
And then the next day I gave an interview for Novaya Gazeta in Russia, and I told them this, and I think also Echo Moskwy. And then his answer became public.
Ale ja zrozumiałem wtedy, że naprzeciwko mnie siedzi gangster.
But in that moment I realized that I'm sitting in front of a gangster.
Ale ja myślałem, że to jest gangster, który potrafi kalkulować.
But I always thought that it's a gangster that has the ability to calculate his moves.
Nie miałem racji.
I was wrong.
Ostatni jego brutalny, bandycki atak na Ukrainę dowodzi, że to nie jest gangster kalkulujący, tylko gangster psychopata.
His recent criminal invasion on Ukraine showed that he's not a calculating gangster. He's a psychopath gangster.
Więc jak pan mnie pyta, co on jutro powie, to ja myślę, że to wie tylko on.
So if you ask me about what he'll probably say tomorrow at the Russian Victory Day, my answer is only he knows.
Na pewno powie, że tą swoją specjalną operację w Ukrainie on wygrał. To na pewno.
I mean, he will for sure claim that he won the special operation in Ukraine. This is for sure.
Że faszyści zostali odparci.
That the fascists in Ukraine have been pushed back.
Że armia rosyjska okryła się taką chwałą jak pod Stalingradem.
that the Russian army is, has been as glorious and victorious as the Soviet army in Stalingrad.
Natomiast ja mogę powiedzieć, czego on na pewno nie powie.
But I will tell you what he won't say.
On nie powie, że się cieszy, że Finlandia i Szwecja chcą wstąpić do NATO.
He will not say that he's happy about the Swedish and Finnish accession into NATO.
Tego na pewno nie powie.
For sure he won't mention this.
Wszystko inne, wszystkie karty są na stole.
The rest, all the other cards are on the table.
I think we'll soon let Professor Hrytsak into the conversation, but one question before that. You and your newspaper are very sharp critics of the government in Poland, the National Conservative government, have been for a long time. Has the Russian attack on Ukraine changed something in the relations between you, your paper, and the government in Poland?
Gazeta Wyborcza, jesteście w krytycznej opozycji do obecnego rządu. Czy ostatnia faza wojny Rosji na Ukrainie zmieniła coś
Gdyby to był egzamin na uniwersytecie, to powiedziałbym, panie profesorze, poproszę o inny zestaw pytań.
If this would have been an oral examination during my university studies, I would have asked for another set of questions.
Dlatego, że sprawa jest skomplikowana.
Because it's so complicated.
W Polsce mamy najgorszy rząd od 33 lat.
In Poland we have the worst government since 33 years.
Rząd, który przekształca państwo polskie z państwa demokratycznego w państwo putinowskie.
It's a government that's transforming Poland from a democratic country into a Putinist country.
W Rosji się mówi, że Putin ma pseudonim Lili.
Jaki?
Lili.
Lili. Mm. In Russia they claim that Putin has a pseudonym Lili.
Dlaczego Lili?
Why Lili?
Bo Lili Putin.
Because he's Lili Putin.
A Jarosław Kaczyński jest mini Putin.
And Yaroslav Kaczynski, the leader of the Peace Party in Poland, he's mini Putin.
To znaczy wszystkie zmiany w państwie polskim są naśladowaniem tego, co Putin zrobił z państwem rosyjskim, które szło od demokracji, niedoskonałej oczywiście, ale demokracji, do autorytaryzmu, a teraz wstąpiło i właśnie osiągnęło już stopień od autorytaryzmu do totalitaryzmu.
Because the government in Poland has put the country on the same path that Russia went through when Russia moved from democracy, not a perfect democracy, but still democracy, into authoritarianism, and Poland is following in these footsteps. But now Russia has taken a final step from authoritarianism into totalitarianism.
Otóż na tle putinowskiej Rosji to Polska, to można powiedzieć, to jest brytyjska demokracja, ale nie jest. No.
But because, of course, compared to Putin's Russia, Poland still looks like a British democracy, but it isn't.
Cała polityka reżimu Kaczyńskiego to było z jednej strony naśladowanie Putina, a z drugiej strony naśladowanie Orbana z Budapesztu.
Because the policy of the Kaczynski regime in Poland has been, on one hand, looking and following in the footsteps of Putin, on the other hand, looking at and following the footsteps of Viktor Orban.
I też łącznie z taką polityką nietolerancji, ksenofobii, organizowania nagonek na ludzi, nikczemnych ataków na mniejszości, między innymi na LGBT.
Including intolerance and hate speech and attack on minorities, including LGBT minorities.
Niszczenie niezależnego wymiaru sprawiedliwości, upartyjnienie publicznych mediów.
Attacks on an independent justice system, attacks on media.
To były matryce polityki putinowskiej, który zanim napadł na Ukrainę, wykonał wieloletni, skuteczny atak na demokrację rosyjską, którą zniszczył.
This was the blueprint of the Putin regime. Before this stage of the attack on Ukraine, he completely annihilated the Russian democracy.
Otóż pod tym względem nic się nie zmieniło. Oni prowadzą w dalszym ciągu politykę antydemokratyczną i antyeuropejską. Nie ma dnia, żeby publiczne pisowskie media nie atakowały Macrona czy rządu niemieckiego, a zwłaszcza Donalda Tuska. No to ich ulubieniec jest.
And in this sense, nothing has changed. There isn't one day without the Polish government-controlled public media attacking Europe. And in this sense, they're very anti-European, and they attack Macron, they attack the government of Germany, and of course Donald Tusk, their main target, the opposition leader in Poland.
Jednocześnie, w tym samym czasie, na granicy polsko-białoruskiej się działy rzeczy straszne.
At the same time, the events at the Polish-Belarusian border were really horrible.
Łukaszenka podstępem ściągał do Białorusi ludzi z Bliskiego Wschodu, wysyłał ich na granicę z Polską i im kazał forsować te granice. Polska Straż Graniczna, wbrew prawom międzynarodowemu, ich odsyłała z powrotem i oni tygodniami chorowali i umierali w błocie, w bagnie, w śniegu.
Alexander Lukashenko lured people from the Middle East to Belarus and then pushed them against the Polish border and kind of forced them to force the border. And on the Polish side, the border police, violating all international law, pushed these people back. And these people were stuck in between the Polish border police and Lukashenko's forces, starving and partly dying in the mud.
Na granicy wprowadzono stan wojenny polskim dziennikarzom, a nie w ogóle polskim obywatelom nie wolno było się zbliżać do granicy. Z jednej strony, żeby nie można było pomóc tym nieszczęśnikom, a z drugiej strony, żeby media nie mogły tego zarejestrować, żeby opinia publiczna wiedziała, co się tam naprawdę dzieje.
And the Polish government introduced martial law in a zone next to the border, banning humanitarian help to the migrants, but also banning the Polish media from covering it. And the whole idea was that they would get no images of what was going on.
Natomiast atak Putina na Ukrainę spowodował reorientację w polityce zagranicznej ekipy Kaczyńskiego.
But Putin's recent attack on Ukraine changed the direction of the Kaczynski regime's foreign policy.
Przede wszystkim otworzono granice dla uchodźców z Ukrainy.
First of all, the borders were opened to the refugees coming from Ukraine.
I Polakom rząd nie przeszkadzał w byciu przyzwoitymi.
And the government didn't obstruct in the attempt of Polish citizens to be decent.
Oczywiście można powiedzieć, że oni tego nie robili z szlachetności, tylko z wyrachowania.
And they were not doing this because they had any noble intentions, but because they calculated this as the right move.
Ale ja już jestem w tym wieku, że wolę, jak ktoś ze złych intencji robi coś dobrego, niż jak z najlepszych intencji to robi rzeczy okropne.
But I'm old enough to be thankful when someone does something good out for the wrong reasons than the opposite.
Więc ja bym tego rządu nie atakował za pomoc dla Ukrainy, bo jak może, tak pomaga. Natomiast to, że w tym samym czasie oni atakują bez przerwy kraje Unii Europejskiej, że oni angażują się w popieranie w czasie kampanii wyborczej prezydenckiej Marine Le Pen przeciwko Macronowi, no to już po prostu jest niepojęty idiotyzm, który po prostu będzie kiedyś zapisany w księdze Guinnessa.
But so I would refrain from criticizing this government's reaction to the war in Ukraine because there's not much to criticize here. But at the same time, they continue attacking the European Union, and at the same time, during the presidential elections in France, they were openly supporting Marine Le Pen in the presidential campaign. And this will one day be included in the Guinness Book of Record in terms of idiocy.
Ale uważam, że my Polacy mamy za swoje, bo każdy naród ma taką władzę, jaką zasłużył. Prawdopodobnie byśmy zasłużyli, żeby mieć u władzy ludzi, których będziemy się wstydzić już szybko.
But we are, I believe that every nation has the politicians it deserves, and for some reason we've deserved to have politicians that we are ashamed of.
Przepraszam, że się rozgadałem, ale ja o tym rządzie nie mogę mówić spokojnie i krótko.
I'm sorry that this was so long, but I cannot speak calmly and briefly on this government.
That's understandable. So I think we should let Professor Hrytsak into the conversation. But before that, Hannes Mejdal will read a piece about Ukraine by Ukraine poet. And I think Hannes will present the piece and its author by himself. So welcome to stage, Hannes Mejdal.
Thank you. Ja, jag ska läsa en text av den 34-årige ukrainske poeten Andrij Jubka i översättning av Nils Håkansson. Texten har titeln Vi har vaknat upp mitt i Alien och skrevs kort efter krigsutbrottet på beställning av den svenska litterära tidskriften 20-tal och dess chefredaktör Madeleine Grive. Jag läser en något förkortad version. Texten i sin helhet har tidigare publicerats i Dagens Nyheter och kommer också att återges i nästa nummer av 20-tal. Onsdagen den 23 februari var jag och några kompisar i Kyiv på bio. Vi såg en ny film av en ukrainsk regissör. Vi var ute och käkade och sänkte en flaska gott vin. Och sen gick vi alla hem för att sova. Vi gick till sängs som lyckade människor. Typiska medelklassmänniskor med saker inplanerade flera månader i förväg. Som medborgare i ett vanligt europeiskt land. Nästa morgon skulle jag stiga upp och ta ett flyg till Vilnius för att presentera min nya bok på bokmässan där. Men när torsdagsmorgonen kom vaknade vi upp i helvetet. Kyiv bombades i morgonmörkret. Hundarna ryckte hit och dit i panik för att i nästa stund tjuta som galna och stirra upp i himlen. För en stund var det som om allt bara var en mardröm. Ljudet från explosioner, avlägsna, som från andra sidan, eller som när du dyker ner i vattnet och hjärtat hamrar i öronen. Självklart var jag rädd. Sedan dess har explosioner och död blivit till vardag. Vi som nyss var fredliga, normala människor som drömde om nya prylar och garvade åt nya memes har förvandlats till människovarelser med ett enda mål: att överleva, att försvara våra närmaste och vårt land. För någon vecka sedan var jag den enda bland mina bekanta som trodde på ett ryskt angrepp. Men inte ens jag kunde tro att de skulle bomba våra städer. Att det skulle pågå gatustrider i vår huvudstad. Jag trodde inte att ett sådant krig var möjligt i Europa efter andra världskriget. Att åtminstone den läxan hade satt sig. Men det här är inte bara ett krig. Det är någonting mycket värre. I Ukraina pågår en massförintelse av människor. I ett krig möts två arméer i strid. Men det här är ett kriminellt övergrepp. De ryska styrkorna nästlar sig in i våra städer iförda vita läkarrockar eller utklädda till brandmän och ambulansförare. De minerar bostadshus och tar civila som gisslan. Det som pågår är inte ett krig. Det är mer som ett synopsis till nästa del i Alien-serien. Fienderna angriper dig från alla håll. Men vår mardröm rymmer också en annan verklighet. Alla de ukrainare som hjälper varandra. Folk öppnar sina hem för fullständiga främlingar. Från morgon till långt in på natten är de ute på volontärarbeten. Gör om gymnastiksalar till återsamlingsplatser för flyktingar. Samlar in mediciner. Mitt i den stora fasan försöker man underhålla flyktingarnas barn. Folk kommer med leksaker och man ser att dessa underbara människor pressar tillbaka gråten. Vi kan inte tillåta oss tårar. Vi måste stötta och stärka varandra. Men alla vill egentligen bara gråta. Gråta över det stillsamma liv som slagits i bitar och som aldrig mer kommer att bli detsamma. Det vi kämpar för är större än Ukraina. Det är också en kamp för Europa. Vi kämpar för demokratin, för ländernas rätt till självbestämmande, för den mänskliga värdigheten. Vi må ha skilda politiska åsikter och vi talar olika språk. Vi är religiösa eller inte alls religiösa. Vi läser olika böcker och har olika musiksmak. Men idag står vi enade och är beredda att dö just för denna rätt till olikhet. Och detta är Europas fundament. Förutsättningen för all medmänsklig respekt och för all förmåga att hantera den underbara olikhet som finns bland människor. Den ryska statsledningen vill förinta denna mångfald och förmåga till mångfald. Den är ute efter att förinta Ukraina. Därför vill jag uppmana alla européer med hjärtat på rätt ställe att stödja vår rätt att i framtiden bli medlemmar i EU. Visa för oss att ni står bakom oss. Efteråt, när kriget är slut, ska vi förstås komma överens om villkor. Men just nu är det någonting annat vi behöver. Att ni tänder en fyr i detta fasansfulla mörker. För den största bristvaran idag är hopp. Och det är just hoppet som skänker styrka och mod. Ge oss detta hopp. Visa att vi inte är ensamma. Den här texten tog en timme att skriva. Och det har varit en underbar timme. För jag har inte läst några nyheter om bombangrepp och död. Att skriva är också allt jag kan göra. För jag är författare. Det är det jobb jag råkar ha. Vilket mest är en källa till skam i de omständigheter som råder. Men så är det väl också. Man försöker bomba oss tillbaka till något slags grottstadium som rådde innan litteraturen och skriftspråket uppstod. Samtiden försvarar sig mot sitt mörka förflutna. 2022 års krig är en zombie. En odöd som obegriplig störtar in i vår vardag för att slita sönder våra liv. Jag går runt med känslan att vi alla har försvunnit ner under vattnet och hör våra hjärtslag hamra i öronen. Men det är explosioner som hörs i våra nyss så lugna städer. Hjälp oss upp ur detta fruktansvärda vatten. Låt oss inte drunkna. Andrij Jubka.
So, Professor Hrytsak, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
So you can hear me, and can we hear the volume?
Yes, I am here.
Yeah. How is the day in Lviv?
It's relatively safe, and still we have air attacks during those 3 days, and we expect the new ones to come tomorrow. We have rather stressful days today, these days.
Yeah. Professor, I have seen an interview with you where you said that the real difference between Russia and Ukraine isn't cultural or language-wise, or so, that the real difference is political, that Putin wouldn't be possible in Ukraine, and the Maidan, the democratic revolution, wouldn't be possible in Russia. Could you develop on that, on these political differences?
Thank you so much. But first of all, let me just thank you for having me on this important event. And let me just say a very brief personal note.
Yes.
I want to relate Adam, my dear friend. I know his name, and when I was 20-some, it was the end of 70s, beginning of 80s, when the Solidarność was born. And I remember hearing his name practically every evening on the Soviet TV. And they were claiming that this is the worst enemy of the Soviet Union. And I listened to that and I thought, this must be a very good man. So I'm glad that when I met him, I found out that I was totally right, and not that he is a very good man. He has an unbelievable sense of humor and feeling of liberty. This what I learned from Adam is a kind of this feeling of liberty. But most of all, he is a best friend of Ukraine. I could hardly imagine the better friend for Ukraine that Adam is. The work he's done for Ukraine is just tremendous. So I'd like to thank you in my personal name, in the name of Ukraine. Thank you, Adam. And now comes to the question. I didn't say in principle that there could be no Maidan in Kyiv and that it could be not Putin in Kyiv. This is kind of the rule of a thumb. So what I'm saying here is basically that we have quite different political traditions, the relations between society and the state, in the sense that we never had a strong state and we always have a strong society, historically. If Ukraine is left on its own, it could always manage with centralized state, so to say. Ukraine has a kind of some, how should I say, not probably cynical, but some kind of very sound distance and sound attitude toward the president, toward the rulers. They keep criticizing them. They mocking them. They don't like them very, very much, but there's nothing, some like, kind of this kind of attitude of Russians toward Putin. And I would say this is very much historical, because basically what we have in Ukraine, we will never have this kind of marriage between state and the church and church and the state. And we have always tradition of the limitation of the power. And this should be stayed. This is the lesson that we learned from Poland. This is very important, because most of the time we used to think of Ukraine as being in the shadow of Russia. This is not quite true, because basically Russian factor is a very recent one, starting from the end of 18th century. And before that, we have been with Poland for several centuries. And Poland is not just a Poland. Poland is a kind of the, how should I say, the example of the Western political framework. Somebody put it very nicely that West came to Ukraine in Polish dress. Let me just tell you one example, that Polish anthem and Ukrainian anthem starts with the same line. Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła, jeszcze nie umarła Ukraina. The Polish has not perished yet, Ukraine has not perished yet. And you will guess, probably never guess, what will be the third anthem that has the same line? It's an anthem of Israel. And why would be that? because the author of the Israel anthem has been born in the Polish-Ukrainian borderlands. So what I'm saying here, Poland was the language of freedom to us. Poland told us some kind of basic concepts, which was not basically Polish, but basically was Western concept. But this is very, 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 very important. So what I'm saying here, that this difference is very much historical, and it's revealed to the full extent. And probably just to finish with this, kind of give example which relates to the nowadays war. There has been discussion recently, but by the two leading American experts, military experts, what would happen if, God forbid, Zelensky would be assassinated on the first days of the war? And they say this would be really tragedy, both for Zelensky and Ukraine, but they didn't change dramatically course of the war. Because look, like Ukrainians, they behave. They behave like each of them is small Zelensky. Each mayor of the city, vote independently, doesn't listen to some kind of the order from above. And I believe this is something which helps us to stand this kind of the unbelievable pressure from Russia. Because our strength is not a state, our strength is society. And this is, I believe, something else which is very much makes a sense of our identity.
I would ask you, Mr. Michnik mentioned that he thought that Putin was turned out as some kind of mixture of a Tsar and the first secretary of the Communist Party. How would you say, is there a continuity, Russian continuity from the Tsarist empire through the communist, the Bolshevik empire and the Putin empire? Could you say that there is a real historical continuity in Russian policy?
There is for sure a certain discontinuity, but there is a lot of continuity. There has been a Russian historian born in Odessa. His name Alexander Yankov. Has been a dissident, very much like Adam. He was expelled from the Soviet Union in the 70s, and he went to the United States, and then he made a career as historian. And he wrote several books on the subjects. And basically what he's saying here, Putin is not a new phenomenon. It is something which is called expression of Russian pendulum, which means from time to time, Russia tries to set on the normal rails, to make a reform, to become a real Western country, so to say. Gorbachev or some emperors before him, or the revolution 1917 before Lenin seized the power. This is actually examples of the Russian building democracy. But what happened then, and this is kind of tragedy, Russian tragedy, that after each of this short period of trying to be normal, there is a much longer, much more reactionary, and much more repressive period of the autocracy. So we should remember that Putin came to power 20 years after 10 years of the reforms that has been made by Gorbachev and Yeltsin. So this is really tragedy. The tragedy that Russia could not come in terms with its history. It could not become a normal country. And Adam made a very good comparison with Adolf Hitler. And there is some comparison here. Because basically what Putin is saying, and basically this was saying mostly by Lenin and Stalin and some Russian idol before, that this is not fault of Russia. This is not Russia to blame. Because Russia should not follow a general rule. Because Russia is bigger than rule. Russia is bigger than West. Russia is bigger than any country. Russia is civilization. And since it's civilization, it has to proceed in its own way, which means basically Sonderweg. And this is what makes Putin that's similar not only to Russian Tsar, but to Hitler, because the basic idea is Sonderweg. We have to behave differently, and therefore no rule is written for us.
I will bring in Mr. Michnik again, both of you, but start with you. What do you think will be the long-term consequences of this war? The long-term consequences.
Let me start with the good news. I believe that Ukraine will become, in a short time, enough for me to see, a new leader of Eastern Europe. On the large region between Black Sea and Baltic Sea, between Moscow and Berlin, and I believe it will be second to Poland only. And also I believe that since Ukraine will get this kind of the status and agency, it will have something to say. The international community have some impact on the reforms, international organizations of security, the kind of things. So this is a good news. The bad news is that we will pay a heavy price for that. There is no sure about it. We're already paying a high price, and the price will be, I hate to say, even be much higher. Because basically, if I could compare this war to any kind of previous war, my preference would be the Second World War. After a short period of blitzkrieg, which Russia has failed already, we would have a long positional war. And this war could go for a very long time until one of the sides would collapse because of the lack of resources. So this is, I perceive, not I, but many experts and historians perceive that this will be war for long. And since this is war for long, we have to pay a heavy price. But then again, a good news is that since we have access to the resources of the West, Swedish, Polish, German, United States, Canadians, name it, we are bound to win. Because this is war of attrition. In the war of attrition, the main factor is availability of resources. So what I'm saying here, probably for the first time in Ukrainian history, Ukraine is not left alone. And therefore, I have to thank you, not just Adam, but each one of you who help us to stand. Thank you so much.
And Mr. Michnik, do you agree with your friend that Ukraine will win in the long term?
Czy zgadza się pan z tezą pana profesora, że na dłuższą metę Ukraina wygra?
Ukraina musi wygrać, dlatego że, jak mówią w takich chwilach, mówili Rosjanie, nasze dzieło prawo. Ukraina ma rację po prostu.
Ukraina måste vinna, och det är lite som man sa i Sovjetunionen. Ukraine must win, and it's like they said in the Soviet Union, our cause is the right cause, and Ukraine is right, and therefore it must win.
Ta teza Putina, która przypomina najbardziej fantasmagoryczne, koszmarne powieści XIX-wieczne, że naród ukraiński nie istnieje. Nie ma takiego narodu po prostu. A kto dzisiaj strzela do napastników z putinowskiej armii? Faszyści i banderowcy. To są jakieś nowe narody. No przecież tu mamy do czynienia z czymś tak bezsensownym.
Putin's claim that there is no Ukraine is so grotesque, and it's so bizarre that it's almost taken from a 19th century novel. And at the same time, there's a paradox. So if there is no Ukraine, who is then fighting back against Russia? Well, it's these fascists and banderists, so it's a new entity.
Dzisiaj Ukraina jest najważniejszym krajem na świecie.
Right now, Ukraine is the most important country in the world.
Cały świat we własnym interesie powinien Ukrainie pomagać jak tylko może.
The whole world should support Ukraine in its own interest right now.
I polskie społeczeństwo, które się nie składało z ukrainofilii, dzisiaj jest w swoich 99% po stronie Ukrainy.
And the Polish society, which isn't Ukrainophile in its essence, is right now 99% of the Poles behind Ukraine.
Oczywiście rząd polski kłamie, kiedy mówi, że on przestrzegał Zachód przed inwazją rosyjską na Ukrainę.
Of course, the Polish government is lying when they claim that they were they were telling the West that the threat from Russia on Ukraine is real beforehand. They are lying here.
Premier Morawiecki pierwszy raz do Kijowa przyjechał teraz, podczas wojny. Przez te wszystkie lata swojego premierowania on ani razu w Kijowie nie był, ani razu.
There was no warning coming from Warsaw because the Prime Minister of Poland, Morawiecki, he was in Kyiv now for the first time. He's never been to Kyiv during all of his time in office.
Była świadoma polityka szczucia na Ukrainę.
There was an anti-Ukrainian rhetoric in place all the
Bez
time.
przerwy wyciągano sprawę konfliktu krwawego na Wołyniu.
The killings in Wolin between Ukrainian nationalists and the Polish local population were always brought up.
I nad tym bardzo pracowały putinowskie służby specjalne.
And Putin's security services were very much involved in these processes.
Wystarczyło jedno życzliwe słowo powiedzieć o Ukrainie, żeby być nazwanym banderowcem.
You only had to say one positive word about Ukraine and you would have trolls claiming that you're a banderist.
Z dumą to przeczytałem o sobie.
I'm very proud of it myself.
Więc jak byłem u moich przyjaciół ukraińskich w Kijowie, to dali taki t-shirt, gdzie było napisane Żydobanderowiec.
And when I visited my friends in Ukraine, they gave me a T-shirt where it says "Judo Banderist" on the T-shirt.
Jeszcze jedno. Przed wojną przewodniczący Światowej Organizacji Sionistycznej Weizmann powiedział, że żeby być sionistą, nie trzeba być wariatem, ale to się przydaje.
Weizmann, the leader of the Zionist movement, he used to say to be a Zionist, you don't have to be crazy, but it's useful.
Otóż, żeby dzisiaj być po stronie Ukrainy, nie trzeba być geniuszem, wystarczy nie być idiotą.
And to support Ukraine today, you don't have to be a genius, you just don't have to be an idiot.
We are running out of time, but I must ask you, both of you, but I start with Mr. Michnik, because you have said it in an interview, I think, in an American paper, that this war will mean the same for Putin as the war in Afghanistan meant for Brezhnev. That means that it will be his fall, his downfall. Do you think that's correct, that this will be the downfall of Putin?
Tak jest, oczywiście. Rosja zawsze dobrze wychodzi na przegranych wojnach.
Yes, absolutely. Russia always gains from lost wars.
Jak Rosja przegrała wojnę krymską, to Aleksander II zniósł pańszczyznę. To
When Russia lost the Crimean War, then Alexander II abolished serfdom in the Russian Empire.
Jak Rosja przegrała wojnę z Japonią, to otworzyło drogę do konstytucji.
When the Russian-Japanese war was lost by the Russian side, it opened up for Russia's first constitution.
Jak Rosja przegrała wielką wojnę, to otworzyło drogę do pierwszego demokratycznego rządu w historii Rosji.
And when Russia lost the First World War, it opened up for the first democratic government in the history of Russia.
Jak przegrała wojnę w Afganistanie, to otworzyło drogę do pierestrojki.
When the war in Afghanistan was lost by the Soviet side, it opened up the road towards perestroika.
I do końca, do zniszczenia tego totalitarnego reżimu.
And in the end, it led to the end of this totalitarian regime.
Ale Ukraina zniszczy imperialny reżim rosyjski. Już zniszczyła.
Ukraine will destroy the imperialist regime in Moscow. It already has.
Otóż mówiąc językiem biblijnym, ukraiński Dawid zwycięży rosyjskiego Goliata.
And speaking with the language of the Bible, the Ukrainian David will win over the Russian Goliath.
And I guess you agree, Professor Hrytsak?
Yes, I agree completely. I believe by winning over Russia, we will do a great service not only for Europe, but most of all for Russia itself.
Thank you. I must ask you one last question on somewhat lighter tone, but about Lviv, about your feelings for that town, because you had this, it has this interesting history of Polish, Ukrainian, Jewish history.
Kończąc trochę
Start Mr. Michnik and then...
na lżejszej nocie, czym jest dla was Lwów? Bo jesteście zainteresowani historią. Co to jest za miejsce?
Oczywiście, jak my mówimy, w Polsce są różne szkoły. Są szkoły wśród oczywiście rewizjonistów. Jedni mówią, nie no, trzeba być realistą. Lwów oddam, ale Wilna nigdy.
Yeah. It's complicated. In Poland, we have different schools of history revisionism, and one of them claims that yes, Lviv we should let the Ukrainians have, but Vilnius never.
Prawda jest taka, że Lwów dla Polaków jest oczywiście nieusuwalnym składnikiem pamięci zbiorowej.
It's true that for Poles, Lviv is part of our collective historical memory.
Tak jak dla Niemców jest Gdańsk czy Wrocław.
As Danzig and Breslau will be for Germans.
Ale chodzi o to, że tak jak Gdańsk czy Wrocław mogą być miejscem spotkania polsko-niemieckiego, tak Lwów może być miejscem spotkania ukraińsko-polskiego. I już jest.
But just as Gdańsk, Danzig could be the place where the German and Polish cultures meet, in the same way Lviv can be this intersection between the Polish and the Ukrainian cultures, and it already is.
Mój przyjaciel Jacek Kuroń, wielka postać demokracji europejskiej.
My dear friend Jacek Kuroń, who was a great figure in the struggle for democracy in Europe,
Urodzony we Lwowie.
who was born in Lviv.
Ma ulicę swoją we Lwowie.
He has a street named after him in Lviv.
Był inspiratorem wspólnej modlitwy polsko-ukraińskiej we Lwowie. Na cmentarzu, gdzie są pochowani i Ukraińcy, i Polacy.
He inspired us to this joint prayer for that was prayed. I mean, on the cemetery in Lviv, where both Ukrainian and Polish soldiers are buried. He came up with this joint prayer for both of them.
I tam, na tym cmentarzu łyczakowskim, dokonało się zwycięstwo elit ukraińskich i polskich nad własną historią.
And there in this cemetery, the elites of Ukraine and Poland kind of won over their historical legacy.
I to jest nasze przepracowywanie naszej historii.
It's how we have overcome and worked through our own history.
I jak pan pyta o Lwów, no cóż, no. Mój ojciec z Lwowa.
I mean, if you ask me, of course, my father was from Lviv.
Ja przyjeżdżam do Lwowa, to ja doskonale wiem, to jest ukraińskie miasto, gdzie jest miejsce na dobrą polską pamięć.
So whenever I come to Lviv, I know that this is a Ukrainian town, but it also encompasses this good Polish memory.
Nasi pisarze, Lem, Lec, Witlin, Herbert, Staff, to wszystko jest tradycja lwowska przecież.
A lot of our important writers, Slem, Witlin, they were all not only from Lviv, but part of the Lviv tradition in Polish literature.
Ale kto dzisiaj chce tutaj mówić o rewizji granic, ten jest ministrantem podczas czarnej mszy Putina.
But anyone who would discuss the changing of borders right now, he is serving at the black mass of Putin.
Po prostu granice trzeba otwierać, a nie przesuwać.
Borders should be open, not moved.
Ja wierzę,
And Professor Hrytsak, how you're feeling about your hometown?
There is such a Polish and Ukrainian song on this city, which has an opening line: "If I would be born again, then only in Lviv, in this city."
To piosenka polsko-ukraińska, że gdybym się narodził
Both for Ukrainians and Poles and Jews, by the way. This is image of the most beautiful city that they had in their biography, so to say. Think about New York of Eastern Europe. This is exactly
tradycja i polska, i
multicultural,
ukraińska, i żydowska.
trade city, with a big infrastructure, anything you could say, and especially cuisine, coffee, all the kind of things you could imagine, so to say. So what is important then, which what Adam said, that Lviv has been a bone of contest between Poland and Ukraine for centuries. Both seen this as their city, as their main city, as their New York, so to say. And they were fighting to extremes. This is very bloody history. But what was important, that exactly Lviv was the place for a Polish-Ukrainian reconciliation. It happened there. Nobody would stop fighting. And the most important message was made by the Jerzy Giedroyć. He was editor of the immigrant journal Kultur in Poland, in Paris. He said, for the benefit of Poland, we have to say that Vilnius is a Lithuanian city and Lviv is a Ukrainian city, period. And that's it. And this is what opened the way for reconciliation. We badly need somebody for Russia to say the same, that Donbass and Crimea is Ukrainian territories. And it's not for benefit for Ukrainians, but for benefit of Russia. So this is what we expect this war may bring, a possibility for emergence of Russian Giedroyć, or Russian Michnik, or Russian Kurik, who will say the same way. Because basically, yes, all the borders, they are not justified by history. There is no justification. They're just, they're all wrong. But you should not move borders. This is very important. You have to make it open, so to say. And this I hereby that sense, I would totally support second what Adam says. And probably my last note. No, what war made for Ukraine? War brought the spirit of Lviv, spirit of freedom and beauty throughout Ukraine. Ukraine now looks like a big Lviv, and Lviv looks like a small Ukraine. This is quite an equality, and I would strongly recommend you to come and see and to witness it.
So, thank you very much, Professor Hrytsak, and thank you, Adam Michnik, for this very interesting conversation. And thank you in the audience. And now we will have a nice reception outside and have a good day after all in Lviv.
Dziękuję, Sławek.
I sorry, I cannot say